Are we set?
You're set.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing today? Happy October. I can't believe it. I have kind of a loose agenda for today. I want to give people a chance to talk. But I did want to start with a couple of things. Obviously, this was a fairly eventful couple of weeks since we've met. We did encounter our first cases, positive cases in one of our buildings, LBES. And we since then have kind of refined some of our protocols, strengthened some of our communication threads, had lots of meetings. For those of you who aren't teachers, just so you're aware, we had a meeting with our teachers and Dr. Michael Bauer from Lake Forest Hospital to kind of answer some health related questions and safety related questions. So as a team, we've been really trying to understand kind of the events of the last couple weeks. Again, refine our processes and procedures. Once you live the things that you've written down and said you were going to do, you realize that, as any good teacher does, you realize that your plans don't always necessarily go the way you think they're going to go. And so you work on that. And as a team, that's what we've really been trying to do. One thing that I would say that I would bring up from my perspective is just that I want all of us to remember that everyone has a different perspective on this situation. And by this situation, I mean COVID in general and the pandemic. And one thing that I've been so proud of since I joined the district and throughout this process is just how kind and respectful and open-minded that folks have been in this community. And by that, I mean teachers and community members, parents. And I think this week really kind of heightened anxiety that might have been there before and has been there the whole time on both sides, right? Community and teachers and parents. And sometimes when we're anxious and afraid, our behaviors change a little bit. And so I just want to, as a reminder to everyone, you know, as we move through this year, this is a really sensitive time, and to just remember to be kind to each other and always presume positive intent. I believe everyone here wants the best things for kids. I believe everyone in our community wants that too. I think that just like anything else, people have different opinions about what's best and how it's best to get there. But I would just ask us as a group, as a community, to be kind to each other, to continue to be open-minded and try to see other people's perspectives and show some empathy. You know, it's like any situation. Until you're in it, you don't necessarily know how you're going to react. So the community, the school's message has just been, we want to partner with parents. You know, we want to have an open and trusting and honest relationship with parents so that we can move through this school year and do what's best for our kids. And that really continues to be our message. You know, it's not about really anything more than that. So I do want to commend our teachers for how hard they're working. We had a successful curriculum night at LBES last night. Really, really proud of them for, and LBMS tonight, proud of everyone for rethinking this event, but also trying to stay true to the purpose of the event, which is to focus on learning and not to focus on the other aspect of this school year, which sometimes takes over everyone's thoughts and emotions. And again, I commend you as a group for continuing to come back and work with us on this very dynamic and changing situation. So as you have probably heard by now, the survey will be going out tomorrow. The survey is intended to ask remote families only, the fully remote families only, whether they intend on keeping their children fully remote for the rest of the year. And the rationale behind just asking that one question is because as an administrative team, we've really grappled with this idea that when we gave a choice in the summer, because we weren't able to be really explicit about what we could do, you know, what the plan was going to be prior to giving the choice, for some of our families that felt like a really hard decision, because they didn't feel that they could really make a choice without knowing what things were going to look like. And I still feel like we're in that position. I cannot really put a plan out there until we know what the community wants in terms of how many folks want to be in. Now, being in person, we know looks and feels different to lots of different people. Some of our community appreciate a hybrid sort of model, a couple days in, a couple days out. Some of our community appreciates full in person. We do know, though, that the families who are fully remote know what that experience feels like and whether or not that's working for their family. And so we felt like asking the question of those families, whether or not they would like to continue in that program or with that format, would be the easiest question for folks to answer, because they already know what that looks like. Now, the only question we can't answer for them is whether or not their teacher might change if they choose to be fully remote for the rest of the year. And that is a question that we can't answer at this point. And the reason we can't answer it is because we don't know how many folks will want to come with us in person. And I do want to recognize that there is a difference between middle school and elementary school when we talk about how this could change or how the model might change. I would suggest that the model will not change as much at middle as it potentially could in some areas of the elementary school. We are working as an administrative team to try to figure out how many additional students that we can safely fit into the building without changing our model, because the goal is to have the least amount of disruption as possible. And I appreciate, I had the opportunity to talk to a primary teacher this morning about another issue, and she felt comfortable enough to kind of express, we felt really good the first few weeks of school that we had, kind of settled everything down and we were getting into a routine. And now that that disruption where it's all approaching us again, that anxiety of what this is going to look like is kind of settling into us all again. And that was the rationale behind asking parents to choose for the rest of the year, because we know that we said initially we would give 3 entry points. And I am feeling really uncomfortable with disrupting our entire system 3 times in a school year. I think in the beginning of the planning, when we were kind of putting it out there, we felt like it's only fair to give people the opportunity to, choose a few times, because obviously at that point in the summer, we still didn't know a lot about the virus. We didn't know a lot about how the response was going to be, what our incidence rates were going to be, we still don't. That still kind of changes. But now that we've lived this for a month or so, we know what our processes are. We know what our procedures are. We kind of know where the health department is in terms of, helping us to stay open. We know how our remote system is working. We've kind of worked out a lot of those kinks. And I really, as an educator, feel really strongly that the least amount of disruptions is going to be better for our students in the long run. And that, if a situation is working for a family to be remote, it's probably better to, stay with that, or, choose into a different in-person situation, but then we kind of let that ride for the rest of the year. Now, in full transparency, the state is very clear with us that at any time, if a family chooses to have their student be remote, we need to allow that option. We also need to have the remote option available for students and families who need to participate in a quarantine, or who, have to be out due to illness. So that option will remain open for the rest of the year. And that is really, quite frankly, the struggle for a lot of districts to figure this out, because it's not like as a district, you can just decide, we're going to go in, we're going to have everybody in, we'll do the best with the guidance. We're not going to do that remote option. That's not a choice. So we have to have that remote option. And we know that for some of our students, being in school is just much more helpful and much more productive for them to have access to our teachers, to be able to keep them on task. to answer some of their questions. We know that it's a safety issue for some of our students to be learning at home. They might not have adult supervision. And that is, again, a safety issue. So what we've been talking about a lot is just in all scenarios, what we're trying to do is reduce risk for our students. You know, if they're in person, there is a health risk. If they're out of school, there's a social, emotional, and academic risk. And no matter who you talk to, you may get a different perspective about which of those risks is a priority or should be weighted heavier. I can tell you, I've talked to people and thoughts are all over the spectrum on that, obviously based on their personal situation. So I, again, just want to emphasize that what we are trying to do is provide the right options for our community, but enough parameters that we keep things stable for as long as possible and predictable for our kids, because we know that's good for kids. So with that, I just want to open it up to questions or thoughts, and I would ask that people be honest. You know, if you have thoughts to share or questions, I might not have the answer right now, but I certainly will write them down and find out.
I do have a couple questions, Dr. Leali, that I've gotten from parents, kind of related to what you were just talking about. I thought that was a great intro just to the discussion. First question is, the survey that goes out tomorrow, is that the official election? The parents will actually be electing on that survey, or is this just a general survey so we know how to gauge, and then there will be an official election later? I think there's some confusion about that, because the process the first time was a survey and then the official election. So just to be clear. And then the second is related. If a family chooses to elect to be remote for trimesters 2 and 3, if Illinois does go into phase 5 before the end of the school year, could they then go in person, even if they've chosen remote for the rest of the year? I think those are the two main kind of confusing questions I've gotten.
That makes sense. Those are good questions. I think that whether or not it's a survey or an election tomorrow, I'm going to ask the administrative team today when we meet to kind of finalize our thoughts on that. My thought is that would be the election tomorrow. You know what remote looks like, to just kind of tell us that that's your intention and to stick with that seems like an okay thing to ask. And again, we get into the same situation of, if we made that a survey and then designed a system and then put it out again, and people didn't choose what they said on the first survey, we'd be back to the same situation of, now that's not going to work. Now we're going to have to delay and figure out what we need to do. And then, you know, you just kind of run this cycle of like, well, I don't like that option, I do like this option. So my first initial thought, and my thought that's been this whole time, is that tomorrow would be the election for remote families. Now, the way we've been running things in terms of whether or not people can opt in, we have been keeping waiting lists. I don't see that not happening. So that if we were to design a system, people tell us they're coming in person, and then people choose, you know, this isn't for me, I'm going to opt out for the rest of the year, that we would then move people in from the waiting list. We have had folks do that. We have had folks move from in-person to remote. So that has happened. We've been able to move kids in from waiting lists. And so I don't see us changing that system. But we will make it clear on the form exactly what it is tomorrow. So thank you for asking the question.
In regards to the form, will it be clear that it might not mean a 5-day in person? It might mean that everything switches to hybrid due to numbers. And will it be expressed that it could potentially change the classroom numbers and structures for those people or for everybody?
Yeah, yep. That's the caveat from the whole thing, is that if the numbers for remote, fully remote, really change dramatically, then that will probably change the whole system for everyone.
On that, would it possibly go to an AM PM, which is what some of the rumor is, versus the 2 days in, 3 days out?
So I've had conversations with folks, and I've been very honest. We've explored both the AM, PM, and the 2-day a week, 2-day, 3-day sort of schedule. There's pros and cons to both. I can tell you from an administrative perspective, the AM, PM is much more difficult for us to implement. And the reasons for that have to do with transporting students multiple times per day, as well as cleaning midday. And the other piece that's really, that would really impede us from doing that model is our students with IEPs. That would dramatically change the amount of time they would spend with us in the school day, and all those plans would have to be revisited. And that would be a much bigger disruption than we would want for our most struggling students. So the AM PM, while it does have pros, and I do understand that for childcare issues and things like that, I get that that might be an easier schedule. And we have, even in the last couple of days, tried to dig into that a little bit more, because I know that's a preference. We're coming up with more roadblocks on that one. AM PM would not work for the middle school. I can tell you right now that was rolled out some time ago. So what we would really want to do would be to align our schedules, middle and elementary, by family, to have the families in for those days and then out for the days they're out, and kind of look at a full day situation as opposed to that half day situation. And again, I've had meetings in the last couple of days with multiple people. I know that's the preference and I get why. I just don't think we, in the last couple of days even, have been able to problem solve some of the situations that it would bring up. Go ahead, Sarah.
So one thing that I was thinking about was space in the buildings. And I know that in our building in middle school, we have a clear map of where people are and what spaces they're using. But I also know that what we're actually using is not what's on paper. So I think that making sure we have a good understanding of what spaces are actually being used before any more decisions were made about how many additional kids could come in. So we are sure that we have enough space for specialists to see kids and that kind of thing.
Yep, that's a great point. Yeah, and I'll tell you, until last week, even I was thinking we could potentially get by with less alternate locations. We're still talking about that, but when we look at the number, average number of times we're moving classrooms, I'm just not sure we can get away with less than we have. We're investigating kind of other options for even some off-campus rooms that we might be able to use. Maybe we're just looking at other options to try to have more space, but ultimately, our facilities are limited. And so there's only so much we can do there, because we won't compromise the 6 feet. 6 feet between kids, between individuals, has been something that we've talked about. The CDC and the ISB guidance are sort of like 3 to 6 feet or up to 6 feet when possible. We're really staying very strict on the 6 feet. And so that limits us.
Lisa, maybe the only other thing to remind the group is that in an event that a student is in school exhibiting some sort of symptom and needs to go home, the procedure is to relocate the class that was in that room. So we're still also having to account for alternate spaces to take groups of students to. And it has been happening on a fairly regular basis. So just something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, and it was interesting, if any of you were, if you're middle school parents, maybe you were on this with me. I was on a Lake County town hall last night, and the Lake County Health Department and some other folks were on it. They were talking about voting and COVID and all sorts of current topics. But one question came up from parents, tell us really honestly, like if a student sneezes, do you have to move the whole class and clean everything, and although the health department kind of said, well, a sneeze wouldn't really do that. And it's true, because a sneeze isn't a COVID symptom. Any other symptom that is persisting with that student would cause us to do that. And we do it a few times a day, and all the siblings have to go home too. So I don't want to be misleading on that point. That is something that we do.
Dr. Leali, it's Nicole. I definitely appreciate the way you opened up this conversation and how it needs to be a partnership, and how we lead with understanding, and we have to seek understanding of each other. And the thing is that I think, especially last Friday, I felt like, and I understand the reasons that you stated, anxieties were high, but I felt that it was the exact opposite of everything that's been exhibited between the partnership of the community and the school. And, you know, just kind of felt very saddened and disappointed by that. And I know that you guys have been revisiting all of the protocols in place and stuff, but what will be the communications and what will be the positives that can come out of this so that when it happens again, because it will, that everybody is better prepared and understanding of the expectations of what the parents and the community needs to do so that we can maintain that high level of partnership and kindness that we all want to uphold as members of Lake Bluff.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for asking that question. I think we all learned a lot. I feel like what we need to do is really, if we have more students joining us in person than have been in the past, or even with the folks that are coming now, we just need to reiterate, that self-certification, although, it's sort of a daily thing that, could get very routine over time, and we could sort of take that for granted and just say like, oh, everyone looks good, I'm just going to fill it out today. We actually really need people to take that seriously and go through each of those questions and be honest with us and have their students stay home if they are exhibiting any of those symptoms. Really take the temperature, really take the time to talk to your student and evaluate whether or not they should be at school. And then, communicate that as soon as you know that you can't answer yes or no to all those questions, that you can't self-certify for the day, that you let us know what the reason is, and we'll walk people through it, what we need you to do. And that, on our end, we can probably communicate more often, that piece about it's not just, when there's a positive case with a student, but there's lots of different situations that are outlined on that self-certification. And internally, our nurses really work with families. If there is a symptom at home, what are the next steps? What do you need to do? And in many cases, if it is just, one symptom, just talking with a doctor, and telemedicine's okay, talking with the doctor to say, this is what's happening, and having the doctor evaluate and say, either you need to take a test, or I'm going to, let the school know that this is not a COVID suspicious case, and having a note sent to us that they're okay to return. I think there's a lot of just fear and anxiety around this whole situation. And I know that it's difficult to make that call and to talk through, what you need to do. But unfortunately, this is the situation we're in right now. And I appreciate that, more communication is always better. And I think that's what we learned. More reminders are always better. And again, just trying to make it as comfortable and as easy a process as possible for people to let us know. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. I mean, I think too, it's just, I know it's ultimately the doctor's decision, but having been one who was involved in the whole scenario, I think it was difficult dealing with the health department as well, as there wasn't a lot of clarity there too. And so I don't know if there's communications that have been happening between the school and the health department to better clarify this. I mean, they weren't timely in their contact tracing, which is a risk to the community. And, there was some, I think, understanding that perhaps people who received rapid tests, there was a desire to retest. So if we're testing, should we be taking the PCR? Like if there's any general guidelines that people could be adhering to within that time frame, that it will actually cause the desired results that we want of minimizing the cases, that we can take on our own, because I get it, the health department's probably overwhelmed, there's not enough contact tracers, et cetera. But those types of things I think could cause us to be more proactive in the future than allowing the situation to just kind of be dealt with, in the unknown.
That's a great point. Yes, I have had that feedback in the last couple of days, that the health department was not as timely, or that there were multiple case investigators on a single case, and then sometimes communication was tough. I can tell you that I have personally met with the health department twice on one of our cases, and it is a matter of just trying to figure out the whole situation, which included a lot of different players. And so I get that. And so I think the idea around putting out some testing guidelines, there's so much information out right now. So maybe we can boil it down a little bit more for folks. I was just on with the Illinois Department of Health yesterday in a webinar, and there's even more now developments around, guidance for health professionals. Like if a test comes back and it's not the result that you expect to happen. So for example, because of outside factors or other contacts or underlying conditions, you expect the test to go one way and it doesn't, then you should be testing again. So even now there's new terminology kind of being put out there, like, because we're still learning. And so from my point of view, I think we can try to put together some more of that information for parents. That the rapid test is good when you're symptomatic. It's not good when you're not symptomatic, and you've had a close contact. There's a different test that you should be taking at that point. Maybe to just contact us right away instead of, the health department, just contact us right away so that we can help facilitate that process with the health department, because we do have some closer contacts maybe that we can get the process going a little bit smoother. And just being really upfront about all the details so that we have all the information, and then we can kind of coordinate that with the health department too, because you're right. There's a lot going on there. I know they've hired a lot of new people. They're probably training a lot of new people. And so all of our processes and systems, they're doing the same thing over there in terms of training. And so again, that's a good question. And yes, the answer is yes, we could do better with that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts or questions? I can't emphasize enough, the position of the district is to keep everyone safe, and our staff and their families and their loved ones. This is a situation that's very, very difficult for everyone. We know that we want the best for our kids. Our teachers want the best for our students, to have them in the best place to get their learning done. From an administrative standpoint, there's nothing more that we are worried about a day and night than staff and student safety, just making sure everyone is safe and healthy in this environment. And the more information that we can have on each situation, the better we do. And I will always be transparent and honest about what we can do better. And I will promise you that we will continue to look at our processes and procedures and refine them as we go along and do better each time. I don't anticipate that this situation is going to go away for a while. Like we've talked about before, even when there's a vaccine or we shift to phase 5 because there is a vaccine, let's say that happens, I don't anticipate that the 6-foot guidance, that the testing guidance, that any of those pieces will really be lifted, because we cannot, until we have a vaccination that's fully available and enough people have taken it, that the health departments feel the risk is that much lower, that there will be an easing of the guidelines for us. And so really for us, it's not about how we feel about the guidance. It's just that we have to follow it. And that's our obligation. So that is always going to, until that is done, that's always going to impact how we are able to facilitate school for kids and these kind of processes that we're going to have to do. We know that if a community is not already doing something in person, they're planning on coming in person in some way, shape, or form right now. Every school is trying to figure out how to do this, and every school is going to have a different way of doing it based on their facilities, based on their community, based on their staff, based on their resources. So I also caution us to compare our district with other districts and what their plans are, because not every district has the same resources, has the same community, has the same needs. Every district's trying to figure this out. And, as a district that went in person fairly early, we're learning, we're learning on the front lines and figuring it out. Other districts will follow suit. We talk every week and try to get better together and collaborate on how we can do this better. So Administrators, anything else that we want to put out there?
No, just appreciate everyone's efforts. It's I've used the term exhilarating in a number of different conversations to explain in as positive a way as I can the experience we have day in and day out. We're doing stuff that we've never done before, and we're having to think through scenarios and circumstances that we've never experienced before. And so I appreciate the understanding on all levels. It's exhilarating.
I would just echo we've written the plans, we've poured over the plans, we live them, and then we adjust. And that's not a new process for us, but it is different given the context of everything. So exhilarating is one, exhausting is another. I think it's really easy to become distracted now as well. And so just trying to sort of keep focused on the kids and ourselves and our health and safety is something that we've been doing. And there's a lot of adjustments happening on a regular basis here where we are tightening up. And so I just want to thank everyone for all that they are doing and being a part of this meeting, and keep letting us know where you think we need to make adjustments, because if we don't hear from you, we don't necessarily know what you're thinking. And so that comment really goes to all, the teachers, to students, to parents. And perspective is everything right now. So I appreciated that introduction as well, Dr. Lealy.
Well, thank you for coming today. We will see you in a couple weeks. By then we'll have some more solid information to talk through. And Halloween guidance was released. So let's start thinking about planning some fun things for our kiddos that are safe and healthy. I know my kids too. The one that has dressed up every year has her costume and has for 2 months. So, and we're getting ready to dress up the dog. So everybody have fun planning, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.